Welcome, dear friends. Today we will delve into one of history's most intriguing and carefully guarded secrets. This video explores the incredible possibility of an ancient lineage's survival, a revelation that could completely overturn our understanding of the past. What if a lineage, long believed to be extinct, actually endured through the centuries? This question doesn't shout. It whispers, creeping into the quietest corners of the mind when the day's clamor fades. What if Jesus of Nazareth, the figure behind the myth, left behind not only teachings, but also descendants? The thought settles like the finest dust in the ancient chapel of one's consciousness. It doesn't provoke cries of sacrilege, but rather a quiet, almost inaudible challenge to established dogmas. For, as is well known, history is always written by the victors. But what if there were those who chose to remain in the shadows, guarding their secrets in silence? Some strictly academic scholars assert that there is no direct evidence for such a lineage. They point to doctrines, dogmas, and the decisions of church councils, such as the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, which determined which texts would enter the sacred canon and which would be rejected and perhaps buried, much like the Nag Hammadi scrolls discovered in 1945. These Gnostic texts, offering alternative perspectives on early Christianity, were excluded from the official version of history. Yet marginal historians, whose voices echo like irreverent whispers in academic echo chambers, have long traced a speculative thread. What if Mary Magdalene was not merely a disciple, but the mother of a secret lineage, a family tree that didn't end at Golgotha, but continued to grow quietly, strategically, protected under the veil of time and secrecy? Picture this. A small boat gently rocks off the shores of ancient Gaul. Inside, Mary Magdalene, heavy with grief, perhaps pregnant, seeks refuge from the chaos of Jerusalem, engulfed in turmoil after the crucifixion. The air smells of salt and the wild herbs of Provence. Somewhere in the distance, in the imagination, a church bell tolls, though historically it shouldn't exist yet. It is there, in the south of France, in Provence, that legends begin, where locals still whisper of a holy woman who arrived from the east, carrying a treasure far more valuable than gold. These are not mere stories, but deeply rooted traditions passed down through generations. Of course, traditional historians roll their eyes skeptically. They assert it's just folklore, mixed with medieval piety, local vanity, and a generous dose of wine-fueled romanticism. Yet, even amidst their derision, they are forced to admit that these legends have persisted for over 1,000 years. That's a very long time for a story to resist attempts to erase or rewrite it. Thus, we stand on the edge of a myth that refuses to die, continuing to stir the minds of researchers and truth seekers. Dear friends, if you find this video interesting, please subscribe to the channel and give it a like. It's crucial for its promotion. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know the geography of our subscribers. And now, please watch the video until the very end, as the most important and intriguing conclusions will be revealed in the finale. Links to new videos can always be found in the description. Mysterious Templars, enigmatic chapels, strange frescoes depicting women holding not infants, but profound secrets. All these elements will appear later in our narrative. But today, it all begins with a simple question, with the faint breath of a mystery. What if the lineage survived? The most powerful secrets, as we know, don't require grand pronouncements. They live in gestures, in half-finished symbols, in stone patterns that reveal themselves only when the light hits at the right angle. Much like the labyrinth tiles in Chartres Cathedral, where tradition holds, initiates once walked a silent path to enlightenment, following a symbolic route leading to inner truth. But we'll return to the labyrinths later. For now, let's imagine a lineage passed down not through banners of conquest, but in cradles hidden in monasteries, conveyed through merchant families, noble houses, and sometimes, when history grew too loud and dangerous, among the simplest peasants. It wasn't about power, at least not initially. It was about survival, because the very existence of this line meant being persecuted. Popes don't favor competing claims to divine right, and kings don't welcome unpredictable heirs capable of shaking their authority. Yet through oceans of time, this whisper persisted, passed down from generation to generation. This transmission can be imagined as a relay race, where instead of a traditional baton, a fragile, priceless, and utterly silent secret is passed. And somewhere in the heart of Europe, this secret is about to find guardians who wield swords, not just for Jerusalem and the Holy Land, but for something far more ancient, far quieter, and more profound. But soon we'll get to the Templars, their secret missions, and true objectives. The night air is full of questions, isn't it? It faintly smells of beeswax and ink, like that used by scribes in candlelit scriptoria, copying texts they perhaps shouldn't have read. You can almost hear the scratch of quills, the soft rustle of parchment as a monk pauses to glance over his shoulder, fearing he might be seen. Remember that feeling. We'll return to it when we enter Rennes-le-Château. But for now, let's delve even deeper into these thoughts. This lineage, if the hypothesis holds true, was passed down not with trumpets and fanfares, but through lullabies and whispered secrets. A lineage that survives because it never sought a throne or overt power. It hid in plain sight among Freemasons, apothecaries, and sometimes, when history demanded it, within the ranks of warrior monks kneeling beneath red crosses. Some historians will still argue, what's the point of a lineage if it never claimed power? But that's the paradox, isn't it? Perhaps its true power lay precisely in its unassuming nature, in a quiet defiance that outlives empires and centuries. And now, as one closes their eyes, the boat rocks again on that Provençal shore. The child is safe for now, but history has a way of awakening dormant secrets. Now the viewer can feel themselves carried further by this quiet, yet powerful question. The waves have settled, but the air still hums with salt and mystery. Let's imagine Mary Magdalene once more. Her sandals touch the rocky Provençal shore, where the scent of rosemary clings to the morning mist. She is not like a stained glass saint, adorned with a halo and serenity. She looks tired, resolute, and perhaps, just perhaps, pregnant. Legend, that stubborn old mule, claims Mary Magdalene fled Jerusalem after the crucifixion, carrying not only grief, but a secret that could topple empires. One version has her arriving in Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer, met not by trumpets and celebrations, but by the quiet understanding of fishermen and salt-gatherers who intuitively sense her significance. Here, she is no longer merely the repentant sinner of biblical lore. Here, she becomes something else, a foundational figure, a mother of dynasties whose legacy would be preserved in the shadows. Official historical circles, of course, rush to present their counter-arguments, unrolling a scroll of refutations. There is no irrefutable evidence, they insist. It's all just the product of medieval fabrication. However, evidence, as we know, doesn't always take a material, tangible form. Sometimes it lives in implicit testimonies, in stories grandmothers whisper to their grandchildren when the Provençal wind howls outside closed shutters, and these whispers tell of a blessed motherhood. According to this theory, Mary Magdalene, possibly carrying Jesus' child, covertly evacuated from the raging chaos by boat, accompanied by a few loyal companions. Among them was Joseph of Arimathea, and likely a chest whose contents were not jewels, but ancient scrolls containing genealogical records. This family tree, whose branch was soon to take root on the European continent. Her image is almost palpable, isn't it? Wrapped in an indigo wool cloak, she protects both her womb and the fragile hope for the future. The boat sways steadily on the waves. The sea quietly hisses against the hull. But her gaze remains calm, for she understands that true survival lies not in military might or grand declarations, but in progeny, in secrets carefully guarded until the opportune moment. Now, as the story echoes across the picturesque hills of Provence, it reveals something quite unusual. The image of the Black Madonna, statues of the Virgin with dark faces begin to appear in the region's sanctuaries, mysterious and thought-provoking. Some claim it is Mary Magdalene. Others see in her a reinterpreted Isis. The official church usually tries to delicately sidestep the topic, changing the subject. However, these statues do not forget. They maintain their presence through centuries, silently testifying to a lineage hidden from plain sight, yet undeniably present. Of course, academic circles continue to engage in heated debates. Was the Black Madonna merely a unique cultural feature, the result of a medieval fashion for unusual pigments? Or, as unorthodox researchers suggest, was it a veiled homage to a maternal lineage that official church doctrine dared not openly acknowledge? The traveler passes through ancient stone villages, where time seems to slow, where frescoes, though cracked, retain their profound meaning. In one such chapel, a fresco depicts a woman washing a man's feet, not with a halo of sanctity, but with an intimacy that troubles traditional theologians. A wife, perhaps, or merely an artistic interpretation. Esoteric historians, these distinguished, sometimes eccentric researchers, meticulously trace these hints, as if following a trail of breadcrumbs. For them, Mary Magdalene is not simply a repentant disciple. She is a living vessel, the true embodiment of the Holy Grail, carrying a lineage destined to intertwine with the bloodlines of Europe's most ancient monarchical dynasties. It is at this point that the narrative gains particular complexity. The Merovingians enter the stage. Frankish kings, distinguished by their long, uncut hair, the use of serpent symbolism, and an irritating tendency to be unlike other rulers. The church struggled to tolerate their existence. But theories suggest they were not merely ambitious warlords. They were guardians of a truly sacred lineage, protectors of Magdalene's direct descendants, ensuring the continuity of this genealogical line. Neither by military campaigns, papal edicts, nor the passage of time, but more on the Merovingians will be told later. For now, imagine a hidden conspiracy of mothers and their daughters, a succession of female generations who pass down not just culinary recipes, but the secrets of a sacred lineage, sacred lullabies preserving the pulse of a long-forgotten dynasty. While kings waged wars, These women carefully preserved a genuine heritage in cozy, candle-lit kitchens and sun-drenched vineyards. You can almost hear the faint creak of old wooden floors in an ancient Provençal farmhouse. Shalom. The scent of lavender hangs heavy in the air as an elderly matron turns to a child. Something ancient flows within you, my child. Something they would have tried to silence if they could. It is a lineage that never sought thrones, but its mere existence posed a sufficient threat. Academic historians, no doubt, will endlessly debate this. Some insist it's just romantic nonsense, a patchwork quilt of folk traditions skillfully stitched together by conspiracy enthusiasts with too much time on their hands and a deficit of solid evidence. But it's curious that these same historians still cannot fully explain the enduring and profound veneration of Mary Magdalene in this region, nor why her unseen presence seems woven into the very fabric of the ancient stones. Where accepted facts fall short, symbols live on. And tonight, following her unseen shadow through cobbled alleyways, the researcher isn't seeking a saint. He follows a woman whose legacy outlived empires, not by the might of armies, but by the power of whispers. The lineage, if it survived, did not announce itself loudly. It softly hummed, waiting for the ears that would finally be ready to listen. Now one feels the invisible pull of this ancient lineage, stretching through centuries and drawing into its profound mystery. From the sun-drenched Provençal shores, the researcher's path leads to a dynasty veiled in mystery and marked by serpent symbolism, to the Merovingians. Imagine them not as faceless monarchs from dusty textbooks, but as living, breathing enigmas. Picture a majestic coronation ceremony in a flickering candlelit basilica, Frankish nobles kneeling humbly, their swords gleaming beneath high vaulted arches, and at the center, a Merovingian king. His hair, untouched by shears, cascading like a dark river over his shoulders. This hair, they say, was not merely a fashion statement. It was a potent symbol, an unbreakable covenant. The longer the hair, the purer and more sacred the lineage was believed to be. Academic historians will, of course, remind the reader that the Merovingians ruled the Franks from the 5th to the 8th century. Their legacy is a complex tangle of endless battles, intricate betrayals, and ever-shifting borders. They will explain how their power gradually waned, supplanted by the more politically astute Carolingians. But what they won't explain, what they cannot explain, is the inexplicable persistence of serpent symbolism that enveloped this dynasty, like a coiled ancient guardian. Alternative researchers, however, contend that these kings were not merely skilled warlords. They were guardians and protectors of this unique lineage. Their reign itself served as a shield for something far more ancient than ordinary monarchy, for something sacred, yet extremely inconvenient for official history. The serpent motif can be traced across Merovingian artifacts, engraved on bronze buckles, woven into stained glass, coiling around royal seals. For some, this symbol was a remnant of pagan beliefs, embodying wisdom. For others, it served as a veiled allusion to a lineage originating from the exiled Magdalene. Naturally, academic circles approach such interpretations with significant skepticism. They point out that serpent imagery was widespread in Gallo-Roman art and consider any attempts to link them to sacred lines of descent as far-fetched and unsubstantiated. However, perhaps the true reason for their unease lies not in the serpent imagery itself. Rather, They are troubled by the thought that beneath the visible surface of the medieval Christian world, an ancient, unbroken thread of heritage stubbornly refused to break, preserving its hidden existence. Imagine yourself in the courtyard of an ancient abbey. You can hear the crunch of gravel underfoot. Past you, cloaked in mystery, a Merovingian queen glides gracefully, her indigo and crimson velvet cloak rustling softly against the cold stone. In her hands rests a bronze pendant shaped like an 8-pointed star, perhaps an heirloom, or perhaps a key to something far deeper. The church, ever vigilant, felt a palpable discomfort regarding these long-haired kings. Their stubborn refusal to cut their hair was not merely an act of vanity, it was a direct challenge. It was a silent but unwavering claim to a heritage that no bishop could excommunicate. And when delicate persuasion proved fruitless, history ruthlessly wielded its scissors. The Carolingians rose to power, and the Merovingians officially vanished. However, history, as we know, is notoriously inefficient at completely eradicating unfinished business. A persistent theory claims that while the dynasty was politically overthrown, its lineage simply retreated into the shadows, assimilated by aristocratic families, dissolved among merchant dynasties, disguised under new heraldic signs, but always vigilant. And somewhere along this secret path, the Knights Templar, these mysterious guardians in white cloaks, took on the duty of protecting this legacy. Now recall the Black Madonna in the Provençal chapel. Her image can be seen more frequently in Poland, in Catalonia, even in remote Alpine churches. Always with a dark face, invariably embodying motherhood, and often surrounded by an aura of mystery. Was she a symbol of universal acceptance, or a coded message for those who knew where to look? Picture a Templar chapel nestled in the hills. The air there is cold, heavy with the scent of frankincense. Beneath a fresco depicting the Virgin Mary, hidden under a shroud, a knight kneels, tracing the image of a serpent carved into the stone floor with his finger. He offers no prayers for victory. His purpose is to ensure that the name, that the lineage is kept in memory. Some scholars still dismiss such claims. Just a coincidence, they might murmur. Folk tradition, nothing more. But the question arises, how many similar elements must overlap for the resulting pattern to become truly undeniable? Is the reader beginning to grasp the connection? The Merovingians were not merely an ordinary dynasty, they were an embodied cipher. And though their crowns were taken, their profound secret lived on in ancient manuscripts, in intricate carvings, in the veiled rituals of those who understood the true cost of this knowledge. The line of heritage did not declare itself loudly. Never. But its presence remained steadfast, like the scent of frankincense and myrrh that lingers in old stone chapels long after the candles have burned out. As dusk deepens and serpent motifs recede into shadow, it becomes clear the Merovingians never truly vanished. They merely changed their mode of manifestation, and beneath the Templar cross, their lineage patiently awaited its next guardians and protectors. Torchlight flickers on ancient stones as the immersion continues deeper into the silence, into the very pulse hidden beneath history's skin. The traveler no longer stands in a grand cathedral. They are beneath it, where the air feels colder and denser. The crypt of Rennes-le-Château awaits. Rennes-le-Château, a name that itself sounds like a hint of something mysterious and intriguing. For some, it's merely a picturesque hilltop village in the south of France. For others, It's a maelstrom of secrets, hidden parchments, and faint whispers of ancient lineages. But today, this place appears as a labyrinth of shadows, where, in the distant past, secrets were hidden in dry ossuaries and beneath weathered altars. Officially, it's an ordinary parish church. Unofficially, well, it's been suspected of concealing everything from Templar treasures to the very bones of Christ. Scholars, of course, are prone to censure and sigh, declaring baseless theories, nothing more than sensational nonsense. Yet these same scholars continue to visit the place quietly and discreetly, as if they too sense that the stones here hold far more memories than they are willing to reveal. One passes beneath a massive Romanesque arch, where a Latin inscription twists, etched in faded letters. "This place is awesome," it reads, not in the sense of ugly or repulsive, but in the ancient, sacred meaning, inspiring awe, holy, and simultaneously dangerous. Here, our story gains a new, unexpected guardian. Béranger Saunière, a 19th-century parish priest who, according to legend, discovered parchments during the church's restoration. These parchments contained hints of a mystery so colossal it could both elevate and topple entire royal dynasties. Some researchers claim Saunière found genealogical records, scrolls tracing not just noble families, but the greatest of all lineages. Others suggest they were merely coded Templar documents. And of course, there are those who vehemently assert he found absolutely nothing, just a priest with a penchant for fundraising and original interior design. However, it's worth taking a closer look. The renovations undertaken by Saunière were extraordinarily peculiar. A demonic Asmodeus supporting a holy water font, an altar guarded by statues of Mary Magdalene, frescoes depicting little-known biblical scenes in a strikingly provocative manner. It's as if the walls themselves wink, whispering, "Not everything sacred wears a halo." Imagine Saunière, his figure illuminated by the dim glow of a lantern, slowly descending a narrow staircase hidden beneath the grand altar. Each step of his boots echoes hollowly against the damp stone until he reaches his destination. There, in a hidden recess, he discovers a small wooden chest, clearly marked with a wax seal, the emblem of a serpent entwined around a star. This man was no ordinary treasure hunter. He was a guardian, deeply understanding that the most precious artifacts sometimes need to remain hidden from the world's gaze. There are various opinions regarding the chest's contents. Some assert it was a document confirming the survival of a royal lineage stemming from Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Others suggest it was an ancient map pointing the way to Templar treasures. Some even whisper it was a sacred book of names, a chronicle of the guardians, protectors, and bearers of that very lineage which had survived inquisitions and excommunications. And here arises a circumstance that still puzzles and divides historians. Saunière suddenly and inexplicably became rich. This wasn't mere luck, like winning a village lottery, but wealth enabling lavish church restorations and the acquisition of extensive private libraries. Was it a mere coincidence? Or was it money paid for silence about a secret so explosive that its revelation could alter the course of history? And now, the characteristic screech of iron hinges is heard as a massive stone slab slides open, revealing a hidden cavity, lined with dust and ancient bones. At its very center, carefully wrapped in oil-soaked leather, lies a scroll, not a familiar gospel, but an intricately crafted genealogical chart. Names branching like vines, traced through centuries, forming a family tree whose existence, by all canons, should have been impossible. Of course, skeptical minds vehemently reject such tales. They insist Saunier's immense fortune was the result of ordinary mass selling, and any mention of treasure is nothing more than a myth cleverly concocted by opportunists. However, if it were all so simple, why then these mysterious cryptic inscriptions? Why hidden chambers? And why such a masterful rearrangement of sacred icons into patterns that, to the trained eye, reveal a story far beyond church dogma? It's as if the village of Rennes-le-Château itself is an ancient palimpsest, a parchment on which text has been overwritten but never fully erased. As one emerges from the crypt, the night air feels different, lighter yet filled with an unseen energy. The gaze involuntarily falls upon the chapel's facade, where two columns rise, Jachin and Boaz. Are these Masonic guardian symbols, or perhaps older and deeper references to guardianship? Here, in this place, symbols speak louder than sermons, and serpents and stars whisper more powerfully than church bells. The lineage here is not merely an old relic. It is alive. It breathes through the mortar, through the sacred geometry that Saunier skillfully carved into his church, disguising it as ordinary decoration, and regardless of whether one believes in ancient parchments or not. The legacy of Rennes-le-Château invariably compels one to keep asking questions. What secret was so dangerous, so powerful, that it had to be hidden beneath layers of myth, Freemasonry, and disinformation? As moonlight softly spills over the village, one feels that pulse, the pulse of a lineage that never truly faded. Imagine yourself beneath the overarching arches of an ancient Templar commandery. The air here is still, yet it feels charged, as if the very stones are listening intently to unseen whispers. Here, ordinary whispers transform into solemn vows, and legends are born not in the grand halls of kings, but in cold, vaulted chambers where secrecy is the first and last rule for the Knights Templar. According to accepted history, they were crusaders, warrior monks, equally adept with the sword and the Holy Scriptures. However, beneath this carefully polished narrative lies another, deeper layer, one that stubbornly refuses to be erased by time. What if their crusades pursued goals beyond the mere liberation of Jerusalem? What if their true mission was not the safeguarding of sacred relics, but the preservation of a lineage? A lineage that, if revealed, could completely shatter the very hierarchy of the Christian world. The Church declared them heretics, and the Crown named them a threat. But those in the shadows knew the truth of the matter. The Templars were guardians of a secret far older than any papal decree, and immeasurably more dangerous. Imagine a secret council gathered in the depths of a Templar preceptory. The room is circular, and the table is adorned with a carved 8-pointed star, the very symbol seen etched in chapel labyrinths, on hidden vault doors, and on bronze pendants passed down through generations. Torches cast flickering shadows on the faces of the knights, whose eyes express solemn seriousness as they exchange vows in whispers. At the center of the table lies a single scroll, sealed with a crimson wax serpent. This is not a battle plan or a military strategy. It is a genealogical chart, a detailed map of lineages, tracing back to a highly controversial point of origin. It is here, of course, that mainstream historical science would interject, asserting that the Templars were primarily bankers, soldiers, and builders, and by no means guardians of ancient lineages. But it is precisely here that the narrative falters. How could a military order amass such sudden and colossal wealth? How did they gain access to closed Vatican archives, secure privileges no other order dared to ask for, and erect fortified structures with enigmatic architectural codes? Marginal theorists contend that beneath their militaristic facade, the Templars functioned as a sprawling, mobile network of custodians. The treasures they were accused of appropriating were not golden chalices or jewel-encrusted relics. They were crucial documents, genealogical records, keys to a lineage that, if confirmed, could destabilize both secular thrones and ecclesiastical altars. As an example, consider the persistent legends of Templar ships laden not with military spoils, but with crates of sealed scrolls and stone tablets. They sailed not to trade markets, but to safe havens where the lineage could continue quietly and unbroken, far from prying eyes. Picture this: a Templar ship gliding across the nocturnal expanse, burdened by the significance of a hidden mission, departing from the inquisitors towards isolated monastic abbeys where monks fully understood the stakes. Of course, academic scholars would caution the researcher. Correlation is not causation. Perhaps the Templars were merely guided by pragmatic considerations. However, when one traces the locations of Templar commanderies, strategically placed along ancient pilgrimage routes that, as if by chance, coincide with the supposed migrations of a certain lineage, this network becomes very difficult to ignore. Within these commanderies, rituals took place for which not a single record survives. The protectors of the lineage were consecrated not through pompous celebrations, but through secret vows whispered beneath candle-lit arches. Symbols, serpents, stars, labyrinths became the true means of communication for these assemblies, hidden from the eyes of those who craved only material wealth and military power. There's an old Templar saying, rarely quoted, "Not all treasure is silver." In this light, it takes on an entirely different, profound meaning that ordinary treasuries never possessed. Let's return to the scene in that mysterious council chamber. The Grand Master, clad in simple robes, with a discerning gaze, breaks the scroll's seal with the tip of a blade resembling a serpent's fang. He reads aloud, not a decree, but a name. A child born in secrecy, carrying a lineage whose existence most would deny. This name, once spoken, becomes a vow of protection, woven into the oaths of every knight present. The antagonism of church authorities towards the Templars then went beyond mere apprehension of a competing power. It was a preemptive strike against those who carried a narrative capable of erasing established theological dogmas. A narrative embodied not in dry doctrines, but in living flesh and blood. When King Philip IV of France initiated the mass arrests of the Templars in 1307, the official charges were heresy, idolatry, blasphemy, convenient formulations designed to justify the actions. However, beneath these, the true crime was possession. Possession of truths that could not be suppressed by papal bulls. Some historians assert that the dissolution of the Templar order was exclusively economic and political in nature. Their wealth was excessively alluring, their influence too pervasive. But such an explanation seems incomplete. If wealth was the goal, why then the maniacal drive to eradicate every trace of their rituals, symbols, and scrolls? It should be noted that monarchs can forgive greed. They can even tolerate power. but a secret that jeopardized the very legitimacy of their divine right to the throne could not be allowed to exist. The Templars' greatest treasure was not a precious gilded chalice hidden in some vault. It was a genealogical chart, humble in appearance, fragile in material, yet possessing enough power to shake centuries-old dogmas. A document that declared, "The lineage continues quietly, relentlessly." As the last flicker of torchlight fades in this stone crypt, and the knights rise to disperse, the observer realizes this was far more than an ordinary gathering. It was a solemn affirmation, a renewed covenant. And somewhere, hidden beneath layers of architecture and centuries of history, this lineage still exists, guarded by the echoes of ancient, whispered vows. The sea surface undulates under the moonlit sky as a lone vessel cuts through the dark waves. One stands now on its deck, the wind playing with a cloak, salty spray settling on the lips. This is no ordinary voyage. This ship seeks neither glory nor conquest. It seeks silence. The Templar fleet, whispered about in dim taverns and disbelieved by royal scribes, vanished on a night much like this one. Official records speak of arrests and confessions, confiscated property and punished heretics. But what about the ships that disappeared from La Rochelle before the king's men could close their nets? Unorthodox historians put forth a very intriguing hypothesis. The Templars were fleeing not just with precious metals. They fled with documents, relics, and something far more valuable: a living, precious lineage. Its significance is felt now. A wooden chest, securely lashed beneath a canvas tarp, sealed with a wax impression of a serpent. It is small. It is not richly adorned, but its contents possessed the potential to shatter entire dynasties. Orthodox scholars would call this convenient myth-making. There is no documented evidence of a vanished Templar fleet, they assert, their fingers tracing clear lines on maps that refuse to acknowledge the existence of shadows. And yet, the port logs of La Rochelle contain suspicious lacuna. Entire days went unrecorded. Ships vanished without a trace. What if this voyage was a true exodus, not of an entire people, but of a great secret? The gaze sweeps across the deck. Hooded figures stand watch, their hands resting not on sword hilts, but on scrolls and carefully sealed chests. They are guardians, trusted couriers of a lineage that would find no place in royal courts or church hierarchies. Every gust of wind feels like a countdown. Every creak of wood reminds them they carry the heavy burden of forbidden blood. Below deck, a woman, her face veiled, cradles an infant, her fingers brushing a bronze pendant hanging from the baby's neck, an 8-pointed star entwined with a serpent, not mere adornment, but a symbol of profound heritage and immense responsibility. This child is not destined for a royal throne. Its future is more silent and far more perilous. They are another link in this secret lineage. This is where the Church's history in this place becomes particularly tenuous. Why was the persecution of the Templars so sudden, so absolute? Why such haste, if not from the fear that something irreversible was about to disappear beneath the waters? Unorthodox theorists point to the sudden silence that enveloped La Rochelle after October 1307. Witnesses to the events became remarkably forgetful. Information grew hazy, as if an unseen hand had reached into the annals of history and deliberately blurred the ink. The vessel sways on the waves, and a small island appears on the horizon. A place unnamed on official royal maps. Perhaps a forgotten priory, perhaps just an interim stop, What matters is that it is remote, isolated, an ideal refuge for secrets that must never be officially acknowledged. The Templars didn't need fortresses. They needed places where truth could hide in plain sight. A stone chapel, a walled garden, a labyrinth intricately carved into the rock. These served as their repositories, and the lineage continued unbroken, not in opulent palaces, but in silent monastic abbeys, guarded by those who fully understood the gravity of their mission. As one descends into the hold, the air grows thick with the scent of beeswax and ancient parchment. Scrolls, carefully wrapped in oil-soaked leather, are neatly stacked like fragile firewood, but the genealogical chart captures the attention. Unrolled on a makeshift altar, it spans many centuries. Its ink has faded, but remains remarkably resilient. Names that have no place in public chronicles. Names that, if spoken aloud in certain courts, could provoke inquisitorial trials. The Templars were not escaping punishment. They were fleeing utter annihilation. Above them, the night whispers of possible pursuit. Perhaps it's nothing more than the restless breath of the sea. Or perhaps it's the echo of royal ships following in the utter darkness, guided by orders to retrieve not gold, but something far more threatening to the established order. A living, breathing truth. Skeptics, of course, would undoubtedly raise their eyebrows. They would point to the lack of tangible evidence, to the suspicious allure of conspiracy theories. But in every rejected legend, there is a seed of truth that stubbornly resists erosion. A fragment that will not disappear, no matter how carefully the ink is erased from the pages of history. The air now feels tense, an age-old weight pressing down on the ship's fragile wooden hull. The ship carries not just people or artifacts. It carries a contradiction, a living paradox, challenging the orderliness of official history. As the island approaches, torchlight flickers along its rocky coast. Hooded figures wait, their hands empty but burdened with silent anticipation. Tonight, the lineage will silently pass from one guardian to another, without fanfare, without any recorded ceremonies, just the silent transmission of a secret too dangerous to be entrusted solely to scrolls. The vessel glides silently into a hidden cove, the sound of the surf muffled by sharp rocks. Moorings are cast, chests are lifted, scrolls are carefully tied. The infant is disembarked last, carried, hidden beneath the folds of a simple wool cloak. No banners, no trumpets. And yet history subtly takes its turn. As the vessel vanishes into the mist, it becomes clear this was not a flight. It was a migration of truth, a movement of something that stubbornly refuses to be silenced. Even when buried beneath oceans of time, one stands beneath the cold arch of a mountain abbey, where every breath feels like an intrusion. The air is sharp, with a faint hint of beeswax and something older, perhaps damp stone, or the barely discernible trace of incense unburnt for centuries. Here, secrets slumber, or rather, merely feign it skillfully. The abbey itself is virtually unmarked on royal maps. Organically nestled into the rocky spine of a granite peak, it is a fortress cunningly disguised as a place of prayer. But the monks here are far from ordinary servants. Their vows extend far beyond silence and poverty. They are custodians of a legacy that cannot be contained within church hymns. Mainstream historians are often inclined to dismiss such places as mere eccentricities of monastic life, relics of feudal patronage. However, if one delves into the hidden patterns, it becomes evident that these remote priories are unusually densely located along long-forgotten pilgrim paths. Routes that, marginal theorists claim, served as vital arteries for a mysterious lineage, permeating the entire European continent in an unseen network of sanctuaries and refugees. The researcher moves along a winding corridor, their fingers tracing the walls that seem to breathe with centuries of lore. At the end of this path, an unassuming, almost bare cell is found, the only exception being a stone pedestal on which rested a bronze reliquary casket. The serpent and star motif gleams faintly in the meager light, representing a silent resistance to centuries striving to erase it from memory. Some scholars argue that it is precisely here that legends go too far in their assumptions. There is no compelling written evidence linking these rural abbeys to a secret Templar legacy. Academics insist, stubbornly clinging to their bibliographic references. But what if evidence isn't always just ink on parchment? What if it's the architecture itself, deliberate architectural shifts, mysterious labyrinth engravings on floor tiles, chapel apses oriented not toward Jerusalem, but toward rarely mentioned constellations? Suddenly, the figure of a monk appears, his face obscured by a deeply drawn hood, his steps utterly silent. In his hands rests a scroll, crafted from ancient parchment, bound with a crimson silk thread. It is presented not so much with official ceremony as with a deep, almost weary reverence, as if this transmission has been repeated for countless generations, always with an unchanging, almost ritualistic solemnity. The observer notices the monk's fingers linger briefly on the silk knot. This was not an expression of reluctance, but rather of profound understanding. Once this ancient manuscript leaves the abbey walls, another unseen link in a centuries-old chain of silence will be passed into the wider world, vulnerable to external forces, yet inherently unconquerable. The scroll itself is not a grand tome. It is concise, yet its ink holds centuries of silent defiance. Names are neatly inscribed, without titles or ranks. Lineages are recorded not for proud display, but for the preservation of continuity. As one holds the scroll, its weight seems disproportionate to its modest size. It's a feeling akin to what an ancient scribe in Alexandria might have felt, watching flames consume the library's priceless treasures. It was not merely the loss of paper, but rather the loss of breath itself, the loss of untold stories. Outside, the wind howls, sweeping through the abbey's ancient arches. It sounds like an ancient warning. Marginal theorists suggest that the preservation of this mysterious lineage was not the result of grand conspiracies, but of numerous inconspicuous yet purposeful acts of safeguarding. A mother passing a simple pendant to her child, a monk hiding a scroll beneath a floorboard, a knight choosing exile over a torturous confession. Within this abbey, these choices resonate with an unseen echo. One theory posits that some monastic orders were never entirely absorbed by the church hierarchy. They maintained their peripheral status, operating at the very fringes of the accepted, preserving oral traditions, symbols, and rituals too risky for public written exposition. The monks here can recite traditional Latin prayers, but their true liturgy remains unrecorded, passed down by word of mouth, veiled in specific ritual gestures and carefully coded hymns. Of course, academic circles would undoubtedly scoff. It's all just romantic nonsense, they would declare, citing the complete absence of documented doctrine. But perhaps that's the very essence of it. Some truths are not meant to be recorded in ink. One finds oneself in a humble apothecary's room, its shelves lined with neat rows of glass vials and bunches of dried herbs. At first, it seems insignificant, but then one notices the faint outline of a serpent carved into the apothecary's massive central beam, almost erased by relentless time, yet utterly unmistakable. This room is not solely for healing the physical body. The monk gestures towards an ancient map made of goatskin, spread out on a simple wooden table. It bore no national borders, no outlines of kingdoms, only an intricate grid of symbols. Here were 8-pointed stars, coiled serpents, mysterious chalices, and intricate labyrinths. This was not merely a geographical map, it was a map of memory etched onto skin. Each symbol denotes a place where a certain lineage was carefully preserved. Some are abbeys, others caves, wells even at first glance the most ordinary crossroads. One carefully traces a finger over the enigmatic symbols, feeling an unseen web stretch across Europe, penetrating inaccessible mountain passes and running beneath ancient city stones. It's not so much about a final destination, it's about an unbreakable connection. The monk remains silent, but one senses the unasked question hanging in the air. Will one be able to remember what ink dares not record? Outside, the abbey bells chime, their melodic sound muffled by distance, but their rhythm resonates deeply within the soul. This is not a place for grand proclamations. It is a sanctuary of silent perseverance. Now, one understands that the elusive endurance of the lineage has little to do with lavish royal alliances or secret nocturnal vows. It survives thanks to these long-forgotten sanctuaries, where history is kept not in dusty archives, but in the very breath, in living memory, in profound silence. As one returns to the narrow corridor, the reliquary casket still rests on its pedestal, left unguarded yet utterly inviolable. Its unseen presence here is a kind of silent rebellion, a reminder that not all true treasures are adorned with crowns or rest beneath the majestic domes of cathedrals. The lineage does not hide in the shadows. It merely waits patiently for its time. The traveler followed the monk into a narrow gorge where the stone walls seemed to inexorably converge. The ancient stones seemed to breathe upon each other, creating an atmosphere of profound antiquity. Every movement, every step, resonated in that silence with a special, almost mystical significance. The atmosphere noticeably changed. The air grew cooler and palpably damper, with a faint metallic tang. Thus, the researcher descended once more into the depths of the underground. By this point, one firmly understood that it is in such hidden places that the most authentic and profound stories find their refuge. Deep beneath the ancient abbey lay a vault. However, it bore no resemblance to the grand, echoing treasury an outsider might imagine. Instead, it was a modest, low-vaulted room, its walls adorned not with the gleam of gold, but with numerous niches. In each of these niches rested a small, unassuming chest, crafted from wood and reinforced with iron bands, some barely larger than a loaf of bread. There was no elaborate carving, no gemstone inlay, just unpretentious receptacles for carefully preserved, yet forgotten, legacies. Some researchers, adhering to alternative historical views, have dubbed these repositories bone libraries. This naming arose not from the presumed storage of human remains, though, who knows, but rather because these chests, they believe, contained the very essence of stories, a kind of DNA of ancient dynasties. The contents of these caskets were not treasures in the conventional royal sense. They carefully preserved ancestral symbols, such as rings depicting serpents, finely engraved chalices, and parchment fragments sealed with ancient family crests. However, mainstream academic science, through its primary representatives, gave these collections a far less evocative name: archives of monastic relics, a term that sounds dry, sterile, and purely academic. These scholars meticulously catalog every item, annotating inventory lists with numerous footnotes. Yet, in the opinion of the marginals, they completely miss the true meaning. For before them are not merely museum exhibits, but rather symbolic breadcrumbs pointing the way to something far greater. The researcher paused before one of the niches, where a slightly ajar chest was noticed. The monk, catching their gaze, silently and with utmost care, lifted the casket's lid. Inside, resting on a neatly folded piece of goatskin, lay a small bronze pendant. This pendant was adorned with an 8-pointed star, intricately entwined with a coiled serpent, an emblem that for centuries mysteriously appeared in the margins of obscure manuscripts, subtly carved into the lintels of ancient chapels, and secretly worn by members of certain noble families. It is at this point that heated academic debates begin. Some researchers contend that the star serpent symbol represents a Templar adaptation of the ancient Eastern Ouroboros, arguing their position with the influence of trade routes and cultural exchange. Others insist it is an artifact of Merovingian origin, a symbol of sovereign blood that was appropriated and hidden by the Templars after the tragic fall of Jerusalem. Oh, this long-standing dispute seems as ancient as the chest itself, guarding such mysteries. One carefully took the scroll, made of goatskin, into their hands. The material crackled softly under the fingers. Its dry, fibrous texture resembled the skin of a long-vanished creature. The ink on the scroll had faded considerably with time, yet remained perfectly legible, and the script was neither Latin nor Greek. Before them was a cipher, a unique language of glyphs, intended not for wide reading, but for memorization by only the chosen, a narrow circle of initiates. Meanwhile, the monk lit a small oil lamp, placed on a stone shelf. The lamp's soft light slowly diffused through the room, gradually revealing faint engravings on the wall behind the chest. It turned out not to be a geographical map, but rather an intricate genealogical diagram, presented as intersecting spirals and nodes, each marked with symbols rather than familiar names. It could be interpreted as an ancient tree or an elaborate labyrinth. In any case, this diagram breathed with life due to its numerous interconnections. Now, an unusual, almost palpable warmth filled the room, as if the ancient walls themselves responded to the lamp's living light, slowly exhaling the secrets they had carefully guarded in their centuries-old, cold silence. The monk pointed to one of the nodes on the map, marked with the familiar star serpent symbol. This node was not at the very root of the labyrinth, nor at its end. It seemed to float somewhere in the middle, a point where various paths and lines converged. According to some marginal theorists, this diagram serves as proof of a parallel command structure within the Order of the Templars, a secret brotherhood whose purpose was the preservation of a specific lineage. This order operated discreetly, hidden beneath the accepted hierarchy of knights, commanders, and grandmasters. They represented a sprawling network of custodians whose sacred vows were sworn not to the Roman Church, but to an ancient ancestral line. It was a secret hidden within the heart of another secret, deep within one's consciousness. The skeptical voices of modern historians were almost physically felt. It's merely an allegory, they would undoubtedly declare, a medieval meditation on spiritual rebirth. However, then the logical question arose. Why hide such a thing in a secret vault beneath an abbey, meticulously encode it, seal it, and pass it down from generation to generation only in whispers, without written records? The monk closed the chest's lid with utmost care. There was no lock. There was no need for one. For the unyielding power of tradition proved far stronger than any, even the most robust iron lock. The researcher realized, if one was destined to open these chests, they would surely know it. Otherwise, the casket would simply refuse to tell its profound story. As one ascended back to the abbey's main cloister, the stark contrast of what they had just descended from was striking. Bright sunlight generously flooded the stone slabs, and the distant chorus of bells once again reminded them of the world that existed above, of bustling markets, political intrigues, fervent sermons, and unwavering skepticism. However, beneath their feet, deep within the earth, a quiet yet defiant lineage continued its silent pilgrimage. In certain closed circles, it has long been whispered that not all significant lineages find their reflection in official royal registries. Certain lines are preserved not by right of crown or inheritance, but by conscious choice. These are families who, for generations, deliberately renounced high titles, vast estates, and worldly fame, skillfully weaving themselves into the social fabric of simple villages, secluded abbeys, and influential merchant guilds. Pendants depicting the star serpent serve not as symbols of pride or vanity. They are rather metaphorical compasses, silent reminders of a profound responsibility capable of outlasting any fleeting glory. Before the researcher left the abbey, the monk gently but firmly placed a hand on their shoulder. He spoke no word. There was no need. This touch became a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding that history is not a simple, straight line. Instead, it moves in spirals, hides in shadows, and then, unexpectedly, reappears. Stepping out into the bright sunlight, the researcher realized that they now perceived the surrounding landscape entirely differently. Henceforth, every ancient stone chapel, every bustling market square, and even the time-faded carvings on the edge of a well were no longer mere background scenery for them. They had become silent witnesses. The true lineage, as one now understood, was never about dominion or conquest. Its essence lay in incredible resilience and the capacity for preservation. This heritage survived not through brute force, but through a quiet, relentless current beneath the surface, like an underground stream that slowly, whisper by whisper, shapes and alters solid rock. And now, it seemed, one carried a part of this invisible yet powerful current within themselves. The path leads the traveler ever higher, into the winding ridges of the Languedoc hills, where wind currents, like unseen accomplices, carry ancient whispers through centuries-old cypress groves. One finds oneself before the majestic ruins of an ancient chapel, its roof long succumbed to the relentless assault of centuries, but whose stone skeletons, like unyielding bones, stand stubbornly, with powerful stone arches and ribs boldly reaching towards the heavens. This place is alien to bustling tourist routes. There are no informational plaques or organized tours here, only the unhurried process of historical heritage dissolving. surrendered to the power of relentless elements, unfolds before one's eyes. However, beneath this outward abandonment, something living is felt, an unseen pulse. One steps over the threshold, penetrating into the very heart of the ancient sanctuary. The interior air feels noticeably cooler and palpably denser, as if saturated with centuries of silence. Softened sunlight streams gently through the gaping openings of broken arches and paints the stone floor with intricate, fragmented patterns, playing with shades of gold and gray. Almost instantly, a distinct premonition grips one, a sense of an unseen presence, as if being closely watched, though not a single living soul is visible around, at least in the material world. The long nave of the chapel stretches forward, its floor paved with ancient, worn slabs, their surfaces noticeably concave from the centuries of countless feet. However, their guide, the taciturn brother who accompanied them from the abbey, draws attention not to the altar, but gestures downwards. Their guide, without uttering a word, points to a specific slab located right by the altar, its edges skillfully marked with a series of mysterious symbols. Among them stands out a cross, but not a simple one. It is masterfully intertwined with the image of a serpent, as well as an 8-pointed star elegantly inscribed within a system of concentric rings. Some marginal historians, inclined towards alternative interpretations, interpret this complex symbol as an ancient sign of guardianship or protection. Meanwhile, representatives of the mainstream academic environment categorically reject such interpretations, insisting it is merely a decorative element, a peculiar deviation in the work of a local craftsman, a kind of artistic license. But for one, it gradually becomes evident it is precisely in such seemingly insignificant deviations that the deepest truths often lie hidden, truths that official science prefers to ignore. With applied effort, the slab slowly yields, revealing beneath it a narrow, almost imperceptible passage into a hidden chamber, which in appearance resembles more a deep wound in the earth's depths than a man-made room. As one descends, the air grows palpably colder, until moisture begins to glisten distinctly on the stone walls. And there, in the very center of this hidden space, on a modest stone elevation, rests a mysterious chalice. It is devoid of any golden gleam or precious stone inlay. It is simply a piece of worked stone. But its simplicity only emphasizes its antiquity and significance.